Hey guys, Joe here at JP Details and welcome to the second episode in the world's most ridiculous concourse preparation detail. Today's video is what you've all been waiting for and I can't wait to get started. If you are new to the channel then please consider subscribing as we are now over halfway to 100k. Please give the like button a tickle and feel free to follow me on Facebook and Instagram, just search JP Details. We're going to be kicking things off with showing you my new £450 toy, which is a 150 litre air compressor made by a company called SGS. This bit of kit is going to provide the main power source to power the Rupes Scorpio palm sander. This is literally the first time that I will be using it, so please bear with me. Plug the air compressor in after carrying out the initial setting up process, which can be found in the owner's manual. Allow the compressor to build up maximum pressure, which is almost 150 psi, and you are then able to plug in your air tools and get to work. For the two-stage sanding process on the Focus RS, I'm going to be using a Rupes Scorpio MkIII orbital palm sander and the Rupes X-Cut 2000 and 3000 grit foam-backed sanding discs.
Richard! Where is it?
To start with, I want to test the 2000 grit sanding discs without water just to see how they get on. I'll then compare the 2000 grit whilst remaining dry against being wet and then see which method is going to be the best option for sanding back the Focus's performance blue paintwork. This is my first ever attempt of doing a full body wet sand, and it's also the first time that I'll be using these new tools. I did get a little impatient the night before and tried sanding the bonnet with a Rupes Bigfoot, but I soon realised that the Scorpio would be much better suited. I had to wait until the following morning to get a 1/4 inch female adapter to connect the palm sander to the compressor. Please excuse the already inflicted sanding marks on the bonnet and let's focus on this Rupes palm sander. We can clearly see that the 2000 grit sanding stage, when done dry, does make a good impact into flattening down the paintwork. I was happy at this stage that I was making quite a noticeable impact in regards to removing a bit of clear coat. I continued this technique for the complete left hand side of the bonnet. With the left hand side fully dry sanded, I opted to miss some water on the right hand side and then went ahead and started wet sanding. By testing out both of these methods to see which is going to be more effective is going to help me in forming a plan of action for treating the rest of the car. I spent a similar amount of time on both sides, and when I was finished I compared the results and it soon became obvious that with a bit of water I was able to flatten the paintwork down that little bit further. The results do clearly show that on the right the wet sanded part is much better sanded back in comparison to the dry side. The sanding discs that I am using are both wet and dry discs, however they do seem to be better suited with the addition of some added water. I'm going to stick with wet sanding the entire car for this initial stage whilst using the 2000 grit Rupes X-Cut foam back sanding discs. real schoolboy error with this detail, and that's kind of the reason why I've done this level of detail on my own vehicle. In regards to doing a full body wet sand, then Tronline tape is essential. I'm going to be completely honest, and I did ask Topaz Detailing what tape they used to cover the edges some 6 months ago when I was acquiring all of the items to use in this detail. Although due to them being such a big corporation and industry juggernaut, they never bothered to respond to my inquiry. At the time I had no idea what the tape was called, and I completely forgot about it until the day of starting wet sanding. I had to be incredibly careful as to not allow the sanding disc to create too much friction on the edges themselves, although things didn't go quite as well as I'd hoped. There's far less paint on the curved sections of an edge in comparison to a flat piece of bodywork. The Tronline tape would have solved this issue, but lessons learned, and on that note of lessons learned, I learned quite a bit whilst doing this ridiculous detail. The key with wet sanding the paintwork to flatten it down is quite simply to spend the time required to achieve the finish that needs to be achieved. I need the paintwork to be completely flat and almost matte in its appearance. If there are any defects still showing through after the areas have been wiped over and given enough time to dry, those defects are still going to be present when you polish the areas back up. Fords are known for having pretty bad orange peel, which is almost on a par with the Mercedes CLS 63 AMG, and as you can imagine, a marble effect on paintwork is well and truly going to take away a solid finish. If you want to see a diagram to give you a better understanding about these paintwork defects, then hit pause now, otherwise I'll quickly explain. Here is your usual types of defects nicely presented in an easy to understand image. Here's a closer reality to dealing with orange peel, and as you can imagine, it does change the concept of the previous image. The idea with wet sanding is to level the paintwork out so there isn't any orange peel, and as a result you will remove 99% of the defects. But, zebra but, with each layer of primer, colour coat and clear coat, the orange peel is going to get more prominent and build on the wavy surface. Flattening down paintwork of this degree with, let's face it, minimal experience is going to be risky. Regardless of that, I am jumping in at the deep end, and I do have plenty of experience whilst using a sanding block by hand, and quite often I do find that when I'm completely out of my comfort zone and when I do make progress, I don't half learn. What I want to achieve with this initial sanding stage is to take the clear coat back beyond that of the depth of the orange peel, which is going to be a difficult task considering how bad the orange peel actually is. I wet sanded the bonnet and the roof with the 2000 grit sanding stage, and when I was happy that a solid matte finish or perhaps a satin finish had been achieved, I swapped over to the 3000 grit sanding discs and then went back over all areas for the second stage of sanding on these two larger panels. The 3000 grit stage is yet again going to take more clear coat off the car, but by doing this slightly less abrasive secondary stage is going to smooth down the sanding marks from the 2000 stage. This is then going to allow me to be able to compound the paintwork afterwards, whilst being able to remove the 3000 grit sanding marks with a heavy compound and a microfiber compounding pad. With the bonnet and the roof given their two-stage sanding process and myself being more than satisfied with the results, I jacked the car up, took the wheels off and put the car on axle stands. I want the car to be slightly raised so I'll be able to tackle the sides a little more conveniently. That is the reason why I knocked out the bonnet and the roof first, because they will eventually be too high up in the air. I don't currently have a scissor lift, although getting one is on the cards. Like I mentioned earlier, I did become a bit impatient the previous day and tried wet sanding the rear bumper by hand. It did work, but not well or quick enough, so I soon gave up. Please excuse the sanding marks, as we'll be going back over them shortly. I began giving the sides their initial wet sand with the 2000 grit Rupes X-Cut foam back sanding discs, and once again I swear to God I wish I'd bought some Tronline tape. Grit your teeth or skip forwards, because goodbye edges. What I've learned from doing this first full body wet sand detail is A, you need Tronline tape, cheers topaz, and B, a 1500 dry stage before going in with a 3000 grit stage on wet would be the better option. In hindsight, if I had gone in with the 1500 sanding stage and didn't have the Tronline tape, I'd have burned through every last edge on the car. I have carried out this level of detail on my own vehicle because it is like making pancakes. Just like when you start paint correcting or applying ceramic coatings, with all of these more involved types of details, your first vehicle is always going to be the worst. If you do stick at it and get some more done and under your belt, they will only get better. I'm not too fussed about any potential burn marks caused on my own vehicle because I simply see them as love wounds from the 200 hours of graft that I put into my own pride and joy. I will be able to give any burnt edges a smart repair afterwards, so it isn't the end of the world. What you can take away from this video though is my own experience and my own personal mistakes. It does take quite a while to fully sand a complete vehicle back when using 2000 and 3000 grit sanding pads. If you went from 1500 on dry and then 3000 on wet, I imagine you would progress a little bit quicker. I spent 19 hours in total giving the Focus the 2-stage wet sanding process. This type of detail is certainly not suited for the faint-hearted. Seeing the paintwork go from reasonably glossy and half decent looking to the average person after it was washed and decontaminated to an almost matte finish actually made me feel quite excited whilst I anticipated what it would look like when all finished. Apply a fine mist of water onto the panel and get stuck in with the orbital palm sander, and make sure you stay away from those edges. Don't forget, every area that you do wet sand will need to be reached with a machine polisher more than once in the following stages. The more areas that you do end up wet sanding is going to keep adding on to the time that it will take to fully compound and refine. We can see a substantial amount of milky clear coat coming off the car, which is a product residue that we need to control, both inside the sanding pad and on the bodywork. Clean the sanding pads out frequently, and for me I was cleaning them out 2 or 3 times while sanding each panel. You'll need a half decent sized bucket filled with water to rinse the pads out, which is going to help to keep them working nicely and effectively. If I were to advise someone who wants to carry out this level of detail on your own vehicle, then I'd highly suggest having 50 odd paint corrections or enhancements under your belt. By this point you will have a clear understanding of how the paint system works and what to look out for in terms of how these advanced detailing stages react with the clear coat. I'd highly recommend trying some wet sanding by hand with a sanding block first, and make sure you stay away from the edges and also the harder to get to areas. I pretty much went full send with this detail, though at the time it seemed like the right thing to do. I'm glad I did wet sand as many areas that I could physically get to, because I did then spend the time required to bring every last sanded section back to a stupidly incredible finish. Here's what correctly sanded paintwork should look like in comparison to paintwork that hasn't been properly sanded. On the front bumper you can still see the peaks and valleys of the orange peel, however the peaks have been capped off. The valleys on the other hand are still glossy and visible. What you need to do with all things wet sanding relating to the paintwork is that those peaks need to be brought down to the same depth as the valleys. Quick shout to Jamel at Ultrashine UK, personal joke, please give him a follow on Instagram and YouTube, just search Ultrashine UK, he's from Wales by the way. If you run the palm sander over each section without spending enough time, then your peaks and valleys are going to be clearly visible. Correctly sanded paintwork, and this goes for whilst using a sanding block and doing it by hand, well, these areas need to be completely flat or matte or satin finish. If you can still see any visible defect through the sanded back areas, then they'll still be there when the area is finally compounded and polished. The Rupes Scorpio MkIII palm sander has proved to be an incredible piece of kit, and at just under £190 I hope it's going to be a long-term investment. The air compressor from SGS also turned out to be a decent bit of kit, but it is worth mentioning that these air-driven palm sanders do require a big air compressor to fully power. I did find that even with the substantially sized 150 litre air compressor, the Scorpio did bog down from time to time. If anything, then I would recommend a 200 litre air compressor, but at £700 I thought I'd make do with my one for £450. This bucket is the one I used to rinse the sanding pads out throughout the entire wet sanding process, and there is now quite a substantial amount of clear coat inside. It wasn't rinsed out once, in fact I actually wanted to save it till the end to show you how much clear coat was actually removed. The residue remained in that block drain for around 2 weeks, and it must be making you think, what's the depth of the paintwork like now? The biggest change in the total depth of the paintwork is going to happen after the paintwork has been compounded and not whilst it's in its current state. There'll currently be little to no difference. The real noticeable change from the readings taken before and then compared with the ones taken afterwards will be clear after the paintwork has been compounded and fully refined. Now that the wet sanding has been completed, which is much to my relief, I set about clearing out the gaps and crevices where the milky clear coat residue had dried. A Detail Factory super soft brush and 10 minutes of my time cleaned these areas out nicely. There are still a few areas on this nicely designed Focus RS that I wasn't able to fully sand back. I did hit these areas more than once, but they just didn't want to lose their valleys. Considering I was already in for a seriously time-consuming compounding stage, I opted to leave these sections as they are. I went through 4 brand new 2000 grit sanding pads and 4 3000 grit sanding pads. I even trimmed one of each grade and put them on the mini Bigfoot to get a few areas that the Scorpio wouldn't. I would recommend these Rupes X-Cut sanding pads, but I'd also recommend looking into doing a 1500 dry sand first and then follow it with the 3000 grit X-Cut sanding pads from Rupes. The Focus was cleaned off, including all of the dried milky clear coat residue on the brown paper. The exterior was dusted off, and I then had a few burnt edges, shall we say, to quickly touch up. For my own pride, I'm only going to show you this little area here. I touched the burnt edges up with my Dr. Colour Chip touch-up kit, and even the camera doesn't want you to see. Tronline tape would have solved this problem, but never mind, it's also a track car. I stood back for a moment and captured some snaps for the old Instagram, and I also admired my brutal yet purposeful hard work. It certainly got me thinking what the car would look like when it's all finished, but it also filled me with lots of anxiety about how much work I've got left to do. As always, thank you for watching. Please drop the video a like to show a bit of support, and make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the following parts of this series. In the next episode we're going to be compounding the paintwork, which certainly isn't one to be missed. Visit the description below for links to the tools that were used in today's video, and feel free to give me a follow on Facebook and Instagram, just search JP Details. I'll hopefully catch you in the next one.